Well, thanks so much, Jackie. I really appreciate you taking the time out to moderate, and I want to thank all of our panelists as well as our attendees. It looks like we have an excellent turnout, so I'm very happy that you guys were able to join us. Many of you are on our Executive Policy Committee, and so again, we want to take the time to really thank you for all of your energy, all of your effort in trying to ensure that law students and law schools are sustainable, ensuring that they have access and are affordable for everyone. And so today actually should be relatively brief. I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible. Today we're going to do a few things, and right before I get started, I just want to let you know that I have two of my colleagues on the line as well, Nancy Keneally and Raymond Al-Casey, who, if at the end there are subsequent questions that they want to chime in, they can certainly do so as well. But for the most part, I will be presenting. And this presentation is going to take the form of two steps. We have some slides for you to kind of go over what's going on in Washington, and then we're going to turn it over to a live demo of this new tool that we are extraordinarily excited to introduce to you and get you guys to use as best as possible as we talk about advocating for our students. So with that, let's actually jump in and get started. So basically, what is going on with the Higher Education Act? All of you are probably very familiar, and for those who are not as familiar, the Higher Education Act is the principal federal law that governs higher education in America, specifically about, law schools being one of those institutions. And so this law essentially oversees quite a lot of different programs. And for particular interest to all of us are these Title IV programs, which are the loan programs, repayment programs, things like that. But there are other programs inside of the Higher Education Act that we care about as well. But we just wanted to give you an update about where the Higher Education Act stands in today. So one, the Higher Education Act, or HEA for short, has not been reauthorized since 2008, so it is long overdue, and there is big push this year to get this bill reauthorized. A lot of changes have occurred since 2008, and so a lot of organizations, including institutions, have wanted some type of update to the law. So in the Senate, they have held a few hearings, and they have given their initial proposals. Nothing has been written out in law yet, but in terms of initial proposals, the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, went around earlier this year, I think starting in February, and said basically he wanted to outline some principles for reauthorization. And one of his big things is simplifying the FAFSA form, which I think everybody can agree is a good idea. He also introduced some initial proposals in terms of automatically taking out your loan repayments through your payroll withholdings. That is a little bit more controversial than simplifying the FAFSA, but those were some of his kind of major outlining talking points. And they have been buckled down in the Senate trying to get this particular piece of legislation finished. And so in the Senate, he is working with his counterpart, Patty Murray, who is the ranking member on the Education Committee, and they work well together. But we want to talk about whether or not actually this is going to get done. And so there are a few reasons why, yes, it is possible that this law could be written in, or passed this Congress, and then why not. And first off, about why. This is Senator Alexander's kind of swan song. He was an education secretary. He was the college president. He is well-versed and well-liked inside of the higher education community. And so he has now said he's not seeking re-election next term. And so this would be kind of the coup de grace of his tenure. And finalizing this Higher Education Act is very, very, very important to him. As well as I said, Alexander and Murray have worked well together in the past. They were the ones that got rid of No Child Left Behind and reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act a few years ago. And so we put nothing past those two in terms of getting these things done. They work very well together. They have an excellent relationship. So it could be that this law is reauthorized this year. However, there are some really big outstanding issues as to why this may not get done. And so chief among them, there are some really tough issues that the Senate is dealing with in which both parties are kind of on opposite sides of the aisle. And one of them is Title IX, otherwise known as kind of campus sexual assault issues. Now, just as a clarifying note, Title IX actually does not exist inside of the Higher Education Act. It's actually part of the Civil Rights Law. But the higher education community has been most impacted by Title IX, and so they are trying to figure out ways in which the Higher Education Act will kind of take the reins for what's going on within Title IX violations on campus. And so that is a very contentious issue for both sides, and so they're really far apart on that, but they are trying to work through those issues. And secondly is accountability, and actually we have a whole slide dedicated to this because I think you guys will find this particularly interesting. Accountability is a tough issue. It's essentially how are institutions going to be held accountable for poor performance, whether that be from student outcomes or loan repayments. And we'll get, as I said, there's a whole slide on this, so I won't dig into it too much right now, but accountability is a big issue that people are dealing with in the Senate. And then finally, and lastly, is the big student loan questions. Student loans have permeated into the public sphere, and so everybody is talking about them, but there are some pretty different proposals on the tables from both sides of the aisle in terms of student loans, and so they're still trying to work those particular issues out. And then finally, what looms large over all of this is the 2020 election. You have two prominent members of the Senate Education Committee who are running for president on the Democratic side, and so they have various proposals, and as the 2020 election goes further and further, it becomes far more difficult to actually pass a comprehensive education bill targeted when you have proposals out there and people who are kind of ginned up on one side or another. And so there are some really difficult issues that people are dealing with in the Senate, and so they are still trying to work those things out. Now, Senator Alexander has said that he wants a bill done by Christmas. Most people believe that is a rather ambitious goal, especially as we are already approaching August. They need to put it out fairly soon in order to meet that deadline. But again, I think I just want to highlight that you should never count out Senator Murray and Senator Alexander. In the House side, it's important to note that the House is a little bit, and one thing I forgot to mention, I apologize, on the Senate side, there actually has to be bipartisanship because there's a procedural mechanism known as the filibuster, which means that you need 60 votes in the Senate to really get anything out of the Senate. And unless a party has 60 votes, then you have to recruit other members from the other party in order to get that done. And right now, no side has 60 votes, and so they have to work in a bipartisan nature. That is not the case in the House. There is a different dynamic such that it is simple majority rules. And so right now, the Democrats own the House of Representatives, and they are in control. And so last year, they put out a bill known as the AIM Higher Act, and we've talked ad nauseum about some of the proposals that are inside of the AIM Higher Act. It would basically maintain everything as is and actually would increase some generosity in terms of income-driven repayment plans and things like that. And so that will be their kind of opening starting point is the Higher Education or AIM Higher Act. And they have had a series of hearings this particular year. They've had 5 specifically targeted at higher education. And so this is a priority for Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Fox in the House. And so they've held their series of hearings, and now they are starting to engage in their negotiations. We are hearing that they would want to release their kind of, as bipartisan as it can be, higher education reauthorization by September, but more likely than not, because the Senate will be the biggest driver, they may not ultimately release anything until they see what the Senate produces. And so it could be that we see something in September, and it could be that we see something after the Senate drops whatever it is that they are going to do. And ultimately, the real question you have is, will HEA get done? And as you can see, we just don't know. A lot of things are still up in the air, and my friend here, the shrug emoji, is going to be back quite often. There is a lot of things that are still up in the air, but we simply just do not know whether or not this is going to get done. As we went through some of the reasons why it could and why it couldn't, it's going to be a very tough lift. It could, in theory, get done, but it's going to be very difficult for it actually to get out of both chambers. And so what will that mean, essentially? So if Congress does not reauthorize HEA, that means that things go along as they have always been, as you guys have been working in law schools. There will be no changes to loan limits. There will be no changes to income-driven repayment plans, things like that. It would just continue to go along as it would. If something is brought to the attention, if there are proposals put out there and suddenly it does pass, that would mean that quite a few of those things would change. But we are not quite there yet. And so what else has been kind of happening on Capitol Hill as well as in the Department of Education? And as I said, I wanted to focus a little bit more on this accountability issue because this will impact law schools in a pretty big way. And so accountability essentially means, as we talked about before, whether or not institutions are going to be held, quote, accountable for their students' outcomes. So whether or not they have a certain amount of jobs, or are they actually repaying their loans back on time. This is a big contentious issue on Capitol Hill, but it's something that both sides are really trying to dig in and figure out what new metric and what new system is going to take place of what we currently have right now. And so right now we have this thing known as CDR, or cohort default rates. Essentially, it's a certain number of years after a certain cohort has graduated as to whether or not many of their students, based off a threshold number, are in default on their student loans. And if they are past that threshold, then that means that an institution would lose his or her eligibility for Title IV funding, meaning that all of the loan programs, the federal loan programs, would be cut off to that institution. Now, the reason why the CDR is perhaps not as a good a metric as one would hope is because there are very few instances where institutions are actually ever taken off of Title IV eligibility through the cohort default rate. And understanding that the student loan issue is going to be even more prescient as there continues to, the balances continue to grow and lawmakers are trying to address that issue, they are trying to figure out a way in which they can hold institutions accountable while not providing kind of disincentives for access and other issues like that. And so one of the kind of the flavor of the month is repayment rates, looking at those things. So that would essentially see how many of your students are actually paying back the principal on their loans, meaning that have they paid at least $1 towards their principal on their student loans. And that is kind of going to be more likely than not a combination of the two, but really the driver is whether or not your students are repaying their loans. Because right now we know that there are several students who have zero payments or payments that are just attacking the interest in their income-driven repayment. And so lawmakers are interested in seeing whether or not we can actually get and hold institutions accountable based off of whether or not students are actually making enough money in order to pay down their balances. And I understand many of you may have some questions about those things, and so I'm certainly able to answer some of those a little bit later on. But that would be kind of a massive change in terms of accountability for institutions. And again, remember that the metric for, as it currently stands, for accountability means that you would lose Title IV eligibility. Now, there is, again, nothing has been placed in law, but they're trying to figure out a new system about what would this be. You may have heard something known as institutional risk sharing, which is another kind of accountability metric, which essentially says that institutions would need to go in some portion monetarily on their students, meaning that they either put up front some kind of cash or able to kind of, it's kind of like a pseudo cosigner for some of the kind of fiscal obligations that the institution is taking on. So that's another system that has been bandied about. But again, these systems are very difficult to craft in a way that won't disincentivize access, which is the main goal of the Higher Education Act. A few other things. So you may have heard now that gainful employment, which was a regulation essentially that governs certain institutions, most of them for-profit institutions. This was a regulation that recently was rescinded. The Department of Education rescinded it, saying that it was outdated and other kinds of reasons for that. And so what they essentially replaced gainful employment with is more information is going to be used on the college scorecard. Now, previously, the college scorecard had not actually addressed professional education or graduate education writ large. The college scorecard only handles undergraduate institutions. But, and one thing you'll note is that we're going to send these slides out afterwards, and you'll see that there's a link here for this debt info, and so you can click that link. But one of the additions to the college scorecard is the department has started to put information about graduate students, including law schools, their debt and kind of repayment info in this college score data. And what the Department of Education wants all of its institutions to do is kind of go on the data and check to make sure that the stuff that they have is accurate. Now, of course, this is coming from self-reported data, so It should be accurate because you as institutions are the ones who are reporting this data, but they just want you to go online and check that. Now this is new, right? The College Scorecard has never addressed graduate or professional education. And so it is not that there are now graduate and professional education programs on College Scorecard, but there is a new kind of debt information section that they may be integrating into the College Scorecard. So you want to go on and check on, make sure that your school is accurately represented in this new information. And again, this information is public, so it would be that potential applicants and students would be able to go and check about kind of previously behind the scenes debt numbers on your institution. So you definitely want to go and check those out. And then real briefly, there are some other regulations. Recently, the Department of Education passed some new accreditation regulations, which essentially gives accreditors a little bit more flexibility in terms of programs that they are accrediting, things like that. And then finally, the department is soon to finalize new borrower defense to repayment regulations. And again, the borrower defense to repayment regulations were about whether or not an institution had defrauded students, whether or not students could get those loans discharged. But again, as you see, my shrug emoji friend is back. And the real question is, what will this new accountability system be? And again, this is one of the sticking points inside of crafting a new HEA, is because this new accountability system is difficult to craft and we don't necessarily know what it will be. We do imagine and have been hearing from our sources on the Hill that it is going to probably be most likely some type of weird combination between cohort default rates and repayment rates. So maybe using repayment rates for the first instance or first 4 or 5 years, but then maybe having some check as a CDR for subsequent years, et cetera, et cetera. And we know that we've heard from several of you and many of our law institutions is that one of the reasons why CDRs don't really work is because many lawyers don't start making substantive money until several years after graduation, and cohort default rates was based off of a 3-year time period subsequent to graduation. So what that new timeline is, what the new metric is, we do not know yet, but that should be forthcoming. I want to just pause and see if there are any additional questions that we have at this time.
Thanks, Ken. At this time, we don't have any questions yet, but I'm going to continue to monitor the chat panel. So as people are thinking about the information you provided to them and thoughts come up, I will make sure that we can ask those next time. Thanks for checking.
Okay. Fantastic. Really appreciate it. So thanks so much. And again, if you do have questions, just make sure to put them in the chat as we go forward. And so I wanted to provide an update on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Obviously, many of your students are trying to take, or your graduates are trying to take advantage of the PSLF program, and many of your current students are expecting that the PSLF program not only be there, but be advantageous. But we wanted to give you some updates about the numbers that the Department of Education has released. So as of 2019, and remember that the October of 2017 was the first time that basically 10 years had passed since this program was in existence, and you need to have 120 payments, which amounts to 10 years of payments in order to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Here are the rates as of March 2019. So that there were essentially 74,000 unique borrowers who applied for public service loan forgiveness, and the department has only discharged 518 of those particular unique borrowers. So that is well under 1% of the applicants who are applying who are actually getting discharged. Now, there may be a few reasons for this, as we said, in the initial instance. When Public Service Loan Forgiveness, or PSLF, was created initially, it was really hard because you had to have a direct loan, and at the time, most loans were FFEL loans. You had to be in the right repayment plan. At that time, there were not as many IDR plans as certainly ones that qualified, and so there could be reasons why this particular number is so low right now. We do anticipate that that number will increase over time, but as it stands, you should know that PSLF is extraordinarily hard to get. The outlines and the guidelines are clear enough, but as we know over several different administrations, PSLF implementation has been problematic at best, and so students are finding themselves, very difficult in order to get this type of forgiveness. And as of 2019, March 2019, the department has estimated that they have given out $30.7 million. Now, this comes way under what CBO is projecting the cost to be. The first year that they projected the cost would be $429 million and only to increase over time. So as you see, there's very few students getting it, and it's not actually delivering a lot of money out from the federal government. And so as a result of this, we heard from several constituents as well as lawmakers have heard from their constituents. One of the issues is that this being in the wrong repayment plan was preventing a lot of people. And so what Congress did starting actually in 2018 was to create this new program known as Temporary Expanded PSLF, which essentially expands the number of repayment plans that a person could be in order to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. It doesn't change the loans, anything else. It just says that if you are in these additional payment plans and it's extended and graduated plans, you now are qualified for PSLF. Unfortunately, the Department of Education made this very difficult to apply for in its instance, and so very few students have actually taken advantage of temporary PSLF as well. And those numbers are equally as low. But the program is there, and so if you have graduates who have been denied, please inform them that there is a new program that they may be eligible for as well. And then finally, wanted to touch on 2 lawsuits about PSLF. So there was a lawsuit that was recently wrapped up, one issued by the ABA, and that lawsuit was essentially about how the Department of Education, how they were, students were granted by their servicer that their employment was counting towards PSLF, only for the department to later come back and say their employment did not count as PSLF. And so it was a very complicated lawsuit, but long story short is that ABA won on most of its claims. Thus, it said that the ruling said that the Department of Education acted in an arbitrary and capricious manner and that they can't simply rescind education certifications kind of ad hoc basis. And so there were some parts that the ABA lost, but overall that was the general census from the lawsuit, is that the Department of Education needs a tighter system about how it is certifying employment for PSLF. And then finally, there was a recent lawsuit that many of you may have heard about, filed by the association, the American Federation of Teachers, and there was a few teachers who they have sued together the Department of Education for getting their PSLF. And actually, we had an excellent call about that lawsuit today. And we would note, although AFT is about typically teachers, it does represent other types of institutions. And so if you have students who have been denied or are having difficulties, you can reach out to us or you can reach out to AFT if that may be something that they are interested in pursuing. And the question for many of you is, will my students get forgiveness? And so one thing that as advisors and law schools you should be thinking about is that certainly PSLF has not changed since its inception, essentially. It's still the same program. It's still on the books. We just want to make you aware, and it may be prescient that you inform your students that as of right now, the program is not necessarily granting as many people of forgiveness as maybe they thought they would. And so I think it's just important that you are very honest with your students that this is a program, it's still around, you should stay, still be trying to take advantage of it. But as it currently stands, the implementation is very difficult. And so you want to make sure that they are maintaining all of their records, all of their ESC forms, all of their payments, things like that. The more records and documentation you have, the better off you'd have a case for receiving forgiveness. It looks like we have a question out in the audience, and has any data? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, we do. We actually have 2 questions. And I'll start with the later one, which is, has any data been published on the PSLF yet?
Yes, and so we actually have some data. I apologize, I don't have it off the top of my head. I do know that essentially it is about 4% of borrowers who are applying for TEPSLF are getting it as it stands right now. I can get the figures, the exact figures for you later, but it's about 4%. But understand that we're talking about a subset of a subset, right? Because under PSLF, in order to qualify for TEPSLF, you have had to have gone through the PSLF program and been in the wrong repayment plan. And so we're talking about a very small subset of borrowers. And so even though the 4% is higher than the 1% of PSLF, we're talking about a minuscule number of actual people who are getting this, thus adding to the complaints, and that's why you have this lawsuit, is that there's just so few people actually receiving the benefits that they are entitled to. But an excellent question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The second question is really not directly related to reauthorization, but one of the things that this participant would like to know is if you have any insight on the issue of distance learners in California taking classes in out-of-state institutions, and they are facing some issues due to state regulations changing and their inability for Title IV aid. So anything on your radar for that?
That is I apologize. Let me kind of go back and take just a quick look at it. So it sounds like there's some distance learning. Is that what I'm, yeah.
Yeah, so there's some current regulations. After a while ago, under higher ed, all institutions providing online learning had to be certified for those, for all other states. And it turns out that the state of California did have certification for all other states, except for it didn't have certification for its own state. And so this is applying, they have a huge online presence in California through a directed online program. So learners in California who are taking actually online classes in California could be facing ineligibility for their Title IV because of the state authorization regulations.
Yeah, so I don't know anything necessarily about that particular issue. I will take I will take the question and I will do some research and get back to this particular participant on that a little bit later. But I don't have any insight onto that right now. I apologize.
That's okay, and thank you so much. We did have a follow-up on the temporary expanded PSLF, which is really, do we think that also that low number could be because there's so few people out there that really understand what temporary expanded PSLF is? Yes,
that's almost right on the mark, right? Because it is, while the PSLF program, if it was implemented properly, is relatively, you meet all the check boxes, you should get forgiveness. The TEPSLF is a new creation. It was created in 2018. And part of this creation, Congress did appropriate money for the Department of Education to inform applicants that TEPSLF program is out there. It is unclear to many of us where that money has gone to actually promote this program. It is, to be fair, to the department on their website, but outside of that, it's unclear what type of additional programming that the Department of Education has done in order to make borrowers aware that TEPSLF even exists. And so certainly you have many borrowers who just are unaware that this is a possibility. Now, one of the other difficulties, again, as I said, when they created TEPSLF, well, not Congress, when Ed implemented TEPSLF, they made a convoluted process in which you must actually apply for PSLF first, be denied, and then you can apply for TEPSLF. Since then, Congress has said basically that's bogus, and they'd like them to change it. Ed is in the process. Once the new appropriation bill is passed, that language, essentially saying that needs to go away will probably be in there. But for the time being, there are just a lot of hurdles that borrowers are going to have to jump through in order to actually receive TEPSLF. So one, they have a lot of difficulties and barriers even engaging in that program as it stands, but nobody really knows that it exists as it stands because it's still relatively new. Interestingly enough, Congress has been appropriating $350 million each year subsequent, so that's 2 years so far for $700 million entirely, as well as it is expected that they are going to appropriate another $350 million, bringing the total well over, slightly over $1 billion in this fund. So there is going to be the funds available for these students to take advantage of that, especially for those who are in the long repayment plans, but it's only going to work if people know about it. And so we encourage you guys to, spread the word, but you should also be hearing from Ed about how you guys can be delivering that message. Excellent question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And there are no new questions. Thank you.
Okay. So, and with that, I want to kind of transition, right? So I said, we've talked about initially, Is HEA going to get done? It could not. But what we want you guys to be prescient is that if it does, it could happen in a hurry. And just let's recap kind of some of the proposals that have been offered in past HEA reauthorization. As you know, last year in the House, there was the Prosper Act, and that Prosper Act introduced this idea of having an annual loan limit on graduate loans at $28,500. And I've given several presentations about this in the past, and not one law school has said, oh, that would be wonderful for us, because that type of cap is just too low to accommodate for law schools as it stands. And so there are proposals like that. There are proposals like eliminating income-driven repayment forgiveness. So many of you know at the end of a person's income-driven repayment plan, essentially 20 or 20 years, depending on whether or not the person is in a specific repayment plan, they will get those loans forgiven. Currently, that amount is taxable. I assume that Congress will try and fix that later as well. But nonetheless, there is forgiveness at the end of the light of the tunnel for those who are in IDR plans, many IDR plans, I should say. But there have been proposals to eliminate that portion. So there are several, proposals out there that could eliminate a lot of the benefits that our particular students use. And so we don't want to see any of that happen. And one thing that we've learned over basically the past year is that a lot of you are very energized and jazzed up, want to mobilize maybe against some of these programs or for some of the better programs that are being proposed, but either you don't have the time or you feel a little bit apprehensive. And so what we've done is we're really excited to share this awesome new tool that we've created, which is an online tool which will allow you guys and your colleagues, but more importantly, really your students to advocate in a real easy way. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch screens for a second and turn it over to our screen. And so all of you should be able to see this is our new Make the Case kind of digital tool that we're really excited that we're launching essentially today. And you can see the website up here, and I think Jackie will put the URL in our chat box. So you don't actually need this home area, but it's cqrcengage.com/accesslex essentially, like that. And that is our page, and we hope that you're able to take some time to go and view it. And so what I want to do is I kind of just want to walk you through briefly what this site is. And so on our main page, and this is kind of the heart and soul of the new tool, and it's really easy. I'm really excited to share these things. But before we do, I just want to kind of jump in. We give you a little text about those, what work that AccessLex is doing. But I want to start down here with these kind of two tools. If you're really interested in being on the cutting edge of what's going on in Washington, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletters that we distribute. And so we're going to be producing a lot of material through this news site. And so we encourage you just to sign up, and it's real simple. You just put your name and email address, and then you will be signed up. But here's some really cool tips. So let's say that you don't know, because in our conversations with many of you, you don't know who your legislators are, and that's totally fine and understandable. So we've created this wonderful tool that just essentially allows you to put your zip code in, and ultimately it will tell you who your legislators are at the time. And so for just example, I'll just put, a zip code for Virginia, and it'll tell you kind of who your federal representatives are. So as you can see, the president and vice president, but then it'll give you your senators, who your senators are, and then it will also give you your particular legislator, your House of Representatives. And you can click on any one of these people and you can see information about those particular representatives, but really importantly, it gives you their contact information. Now, we're going to do an awesome tool that's going to connect you straight to your legislator, which is really great and really easy. But if at any time you ever wanted to go meet with your particular representatives or your senators, here are your contact information. And so that's a great way. It's a real simple way that you can go and find your particular legislators. Down a little bit below that, you'll see our Twitter feed. And so we talk about, all the stuff that AccessLex has going on. We have some more Road to Zero presentations. You can see our presentation here today. We have some grants that I'll be talking about later that you should all be applying for, and news, so you can see our Twitter feed right there. But I do want to draw your attention to the bills we're watching because, as I said, HEA is a big, big, big bill, but there are oftentimes legislation that will change a lot of stuff inside of higher education that you guys should be aware of. Now, I just want to be very clear about these. These are simply bills that have been introduced into Congress. Should they actually pass and become law, obviously we'll tell you about them, but these are bills that we're watching because a lot of these bills will help students, help law schools, and help institutions really sustain. For example, I want to bring your attention to, for example, this Protecting Jobs Opportunities for Borrowers Act, because this is extraordinarily relevant. And so if you click on any one of these bills, it will take you to a page about that bill. And you can see our position as Access Lex. We support the bill. We give you a description about this bill, and we give you some commentary about this. I think, for example, this bill is a really awesome one because what it does is there are several states across the United States which essentially says that if your students are defaulting on their loans, then the state has the authority to yank their professional licensure. You can see how this could be problematic for new, struggling, recent law graduates, right? So let's say that they've, had some tough time finding a job. Some of your graduates, they, took the bar, are licensed, but they've defaulted on their student loans. They could have their law license yanked in several states. And so this job at the federal level, this bill at the federal level would block or bar that practice, right? So that's something that we are advocating for because we don't want to see people losing their law license based off of their defaulting of a student loans. And so this is something that we support, but you could also be supporting. You could contact your member of Congress of those who are the original and co-sponsors. So that would be Senator Marco Rubio or Elizabeth Warren, who they work together, despite them being on opposite sides of the aisles. Interestingly enough, both of those two senators have the most co-sponsorships of one another. So they actually are the two senators who work the best together. And so you could contact any one of those representatives to say, hey, this is a really great bill. We hope you pass it, things like that. And so again, for each one of these bills that we're monitoring, and you'll see that there's a difference between a House and a Senate version. Many times the same bill is offered in both chambers. And so we tell you, we show you on this site, here's the House version, here's the Senate version, and you can click on those to see any one of those things. We are monitoring a whole host of bills, so we really, really, really do encourage you to check out some of these bills because there are a lot of good stuff that's going on in terms of what could be happening, changes to the law that would affect certainly your students. So please take a time to look at some of those bills and either support those as well. And finally, at the bottom, we have an awesome YouTube video narrated by our Director of Policy, Nancy Keneally, and she talks about basically our Make the Case campaign overview. And so that's on our main page, and I will be jumping back to the meat and potatoes up here in a second, but I briefly just want to take you through some of the other things. And so if you're interested in some of your state level advocacy, things that are going on in your particular states, so not at the federal level, but at the state level, you have this opportunity. We provide you with some talking points or some things that you can do to advocate at the state level. But similarly, unlike the first page, where if you entered your address, you would get a federal legislators, here you'll get your actual local legislators. And so you will see who your governors, lieutenant governors, et cetera, are, but also your state representatives, so those who are in the state capitals and the state houses. And so again, similar to the other way, you can click on them. They have their offices and contact information there as well. We talk about some of the issues that we are concerned about, so IDR, income-driven repayment plan, public service loan forgiveness, loan counseling, and loan financing or licensure financing. So we have some issues, and if you click on any one of these will take you to kind of a one-pager about that. About those particular issues. And again, that's an education tool. So if you want to educate yourself, or more importantly, educating your members, you should go ahead and take that out. Finally, I just want to note about our news section. So every week, as I have told you guys, we produce this higher ed roundup, which you should be reading. And each week we produce information about what's going on in Washington. So please take a time to read this. We try to make it, as succinct as possible, just straight to the point about what's going on. As you can see, we talked about the recession of gainful employment. So this was, talked about a few weeks ago in this roundup. And so we really want you to be focusing just, what's important to you guys. And then we provide some, resources in terms of here are a few reports you may be interested in. And then similarly to our main page, some of the legislation that has to deal with higher education. Now, it is not the case that on our recent legislation list in the higher education roundup is all the legislation that we support. All of those things will be on our main site, so all of these bills we actually support, but we just want to alert you to some of the new bills that are coming out inside of the higher education space. And so ultimately, let's talk about actually advocating, because that's what we really would like you to do and how you can get involved in a very meaningful way, but we want to make it as easy as possible. So we heard from you saying that you don't have time or it's very difficult, you're not aware of certain things. And so we have kind of 4 little tabs for you. So one is that you can actually write your members, and this will be really prescient if there does emerge a bill in the Senate, because let's say that, for example, something that Senator Alexander has proposed in the past is kind of capping or eliminating the Grad Plus loan. So if something like that were to occur, it would be important to be contacting your members of Congress. And so we have kind of 4 ways that you can kind of do that. So you can write your members of Congress, which essentially will send them an email, and we'll run through one of those. You can call your member of Congress. You can actually connect through them with social media using Twitter, which is a great tool. And then finally, if you're having some issues or you're sharing or you're hearing from some of your students, we'd love for you to share those stories with us so that we can pass them along, as we are the ones going on to meet with your representatives on the Hill. But I just wanted to go through about how you can write your particular member, because this is a really easy tool for you guys to do. So we give you some kind of introductory instructions, and essentially all you need to do is input your contact information so that we can connect you with your particular member, and then you send it off, and it's really cool. So I'm actually just going to put in a test person right now, and this is kind of a person that we have created up here, and we're just going to use our headquarter offices, and I'm thinking it's 19380. And you input your information, and we'd like you to stay informed. Again, this is another way of just registering with us so that you can get on the email list that we have for this particular issue. And so we'd like you to stay informed, but that's all you do. You put in your information and you preview your letter, and it will automatically draft this letter sample for you along with any of your representatives in the federal level. So here off the side, we give you some brief instructions, basically going through what I'm going to say here today, but you can always choose which recipient you want to pick to go to. So maybe you only want to send it to Senator Casey or Senator Toomey, or maybe you only want to send it to your representative, and that would be Ms. Houlihan right now. And again, you can edit this to your heart's content, but we wanted to make it as easy as possible for you. And again, we hope that you take advantage of this, your colleagues take advantage of this, but also share this with your students, right? So if, for example, HEA comes out and it eliminates PSLF, well, then you want them to advocate on their behalf to say, hey, I was really going to law school because I want to work in the public sector. I expected this program to be here. Don't cut this program. And so utilize this tool for not only yourselves, but also your students as well. And as I said, you can change the message, and actually we have kind of randomized messages subject headings for them. So every time you actually do this type of activity, it will change the subject header, and then you can change. But as I said, we tried to make this as easy as possible for you. So we have listed out kind of a message that basically talks about the need for access and affordability, all stuff that we care about in general. But we want you to be as specific as possible. Maybe there is some story that you want to tell about your particular school and your particular experience. So go ahead and feel free to change and edit and modify this letter as you see fit. And then you can close and you put your name down here. All that stuff should be pre-populated from the previous page, and then you click submit. Now, because I should be clear, this is a live, active, full-blown site, meaning that if I click submit right now, this letter would go to all 3 of these representatives. I am not going to click submit, but certainly feel free, once you've actually looked and reviewed over this letter, to go ahead and click submit. And what that will do essentially is it will send these messages to these representatives on your behalf. And so that is a really, really, really awesome way, especially when things come out, as I said, when the next HEA emerges and maybe it has some troubling provisions in there, we're going to call on you to activate yourselves as well as your students to really get engaged. Similarly, we have a phone call system. It's the same thing. You put in your information. It will give you talking points like on the letter. So, we've, again, given you and provided you that opportunity for you to do that. And again, one thing also is that you can share this stuff via social media, whether LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or email. So any one of these engagements, you can actually share on your social networks as well. So it doesn't just have to be you at the school, it can be your network of friends, things like that, because we know all of your families care about that. And then finally, I just want to kind of point to the tweeting, connecting with social media. So it's the same tool that, you put in your information. So I'll just put in this test person again. And this is our, as a reminder, this is our headquarters office. And this is how this tool will work. It's really, really, really awesome. So you can connect with, as you know, that social media, especially Twitter, a lot of politicians, if not all of them, are on this particular platform right now. They really do pay attention, but they want to hear from their particular constituents. And so when you actually engage in this, we have crafted some sample tweets for you to send, and all of them are already pre-populated. And what's really, really, really cool about this tool is if they are on like the specific committee that is authorizing this, it will craft them a specific message. For example, Patrick Toomey is not on the Health Education Committee, so he has a different message than what Senator Casey, who is on the committee, has, right? So that's a really awesome opportunity. But again, you can change this as your heart's content. If you wanted to say, hi, I appreciate you working with us on, something, so on and so forth, you can do that. And if you ever want to go back to the default text, you can just click that button and it goes back to there. One final thing I just want to note about the tweeting is that this period in front of the member's name indicates that that message kind of they get tagged in that message. If you want to kind of send them, it's not really a direct message, but kind of a direct message, is you can just go ahead and eliminate that period, and that sends them a kind of direct message for those of you who are familiar with the platform. But all of that is outlined in these instructions. And then you can click Finish, Send All. If you only want to send one member, you can do that as well. And then finally, I want to just quickly share, the stories one. This is the same thing. We are trying to collect as many stories as possible so that we can pass those along. So for example, if I'm in North Carolina meeting with Senator Burr or representatives in North Carolina or in Georgia or wherever I am meeting with when I'm on the Hill, if I have stories to share with them that you guys have presented, that it becomes so much more powerful because those are real constituent stories. So we just ask you to fill this information in, and then you can just, kind of write away about, here's what happened to me, here's what my students are saying. The more stories we can compile, the better. And so essentially that is our new tool. We try to make it as easy as possible. We'd love to get your feedback on some of the things that you can see, but certainly as HEA emerges, we're going to call on you, and this will be kind of your go-to point for anything that Access Lex does in the advocacy and policy field for the time being. And so we really, really, really hope that you can take advantage of this. And so I just want to finish and close out the presentation telling you quickly about a little bit more what we've done over the past few months. We produced 2 reports. We're really, really excited. We hope you have a chance to read both of these reports, Examining Grad Plus and Examining Graduate Lending. Essentially, there have been calls and proposals to eliminate Graduate Plus, the loan program, which we know that a lot of your students are taking advantage of. And so we argue that many of the concerns that people are offering, not that there are no concerns, but many of the concerns that people are proffering about who would eliminate Grad Plus are kind of overblown. And so that's what the first report is about. And then secondly, there is a thought that all federal lending to graduate students at all should be eliminated and thus all go to the private sector. And we argue how that would be detrimental to access in a way that we've not seen in prior history, and especially for Black students and HBCUs. The privatization of graduate lending would be devastating from an access perspective. And so we hope you have a chance to read those reports. Just want to draw your attention to some resources that Access Lex is offering. And so many of you are very intimately familiar with analytics, which is about legal education data. So taking a lot of the ABA's data and putting it in an easy to read fashion so you can do compare and contrast with some of your schools versus other schools in various metrics. We're excited to announce that we've recently launched the ARC, which is a collection of scholarly research in these particular areas, and so you should check that out. Many of you are aware of the MAX program, which is put on by our excellent ESR field team, which is about financial and legal education, financial literacy, things like that, that students can take it a part of. We're really excited about where this program has been and where it is going. So certainly take a look at that. And this is an upcoming, Explore JD is upcoming in the future, so it hasn't been launched yet, but it will be a tool that allows prospective students who want to go to a law school to kind of match some of the things that they're interested in with some of their profile and deliver a way for school recommendations. It's a really awesome tool, and we're excited to launch that sometime soon. And then finally, I just want to draw your attention to the money. You know, we have several different grant programs available. We hope that all of you are taking advantage of all of them. You know, we have recently launched a new financial education research grant program. While the LOI has closed for this particular year, you should go ahead and research and see if you want to apply for next year. It's a brand new program. It is really awesome. The unsolicited grant program is currently going on right now. It closes in 6 days. But if you want to turn around a grant proposal that quickly, you're more than welcome to do so. But these are our grant programs, and we really hope you take advantage of a lot of these things. And with that, that is all I have to say. Here's a way that you can contact our policy team, so policy@AccessLec, or you should follow us on Twitter, because social media is really taking off, and that's why we have that social media tool, and so that's our contact information. And with that, there are any questions, I'd be happy to take some. If not, you know, we will stay on the lines and answer any questions that you have, but we want to thank you for your time today. We really, really, really appreciate those who are on the Executive Policy Committee. If you're interested in being a part of that, please let us know. And we just look forward to working with you in the future and keeping you updated. But are there any questions?